So good evening, everyone. Is this on?
We let it cool all
Okay.
afternoon.
I'd like to welcome all of you to the Lenten series. And tonight, I'm not going to tell you who the guest is yet. You might have guessed, but we'll do it formally in a little while. I'm your host along with Catherine tonight. I'm Jan, Catherine, and welcome to First United for, is this the fourth in the Lenten series? The fourth in the Lenten series. We have two more to go, and I'll talk about those later on. Just to let you know that our guest is going to stay on topic for between 30 minutes, maybe as long as an hour, depending on how the clay flies. And there will be time for questions afterwards. So you can ask questions, and we have refreshments later.
I'd like us to begin by singing In the Quiet Curve of Evening. It's printed. And I invite you to, when you have a minute, but not right now, to read from God's hands. It was interesting when I picked out In the Quiet Curve of Evening and went back three numbers. This quotation from Irenaeus, a Christian of the 2nd century, there was this quotation in the hymn book. So, I mean, it was quite by chance that I found it, but it's a great statement for us to begin. In the Quiet Curve of Evening. Join with me in this opening prayer. Holy God, join with us in this time of reflection, that we may come to know the many blessings you share with us. nurture our ability to see and feel and hear the depths of your love for us. You are the potter, and we are the clay. Mold us and bless us for your service, we pray. Amen. Please be seated. The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Come, go down to the potter's house, and there I will let you hear my words. So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working at his wheel. The vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hand, and he reworked it into another vessel, as seemed good to him. Then the word of the Lord came to me. Can I not do with you, O house of Israel, just as this potter has done, says the Lord? Just like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. At one moment I may declare concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will pluck up and break down and destroy it. But if that nation concerning which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will change my mind about the disaster I intended to bring on it. And at another moment I may declare concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will build and plant it. But if it does what is evil in my sight, not listening to my voice, then I will change my mind about the good I intended to do about it. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Thanks be to God.
Tonight it is my pleasure to introduce to you a man who plays in the mud and makes raku. This man began playing with clay in 1968 while working at Naramata Center and learned basic techniques with David Ross and Fulmer Hansen at their studio in Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan. He has built potter's wheels and kilns and all manner of studio equipment, both raku, which is low-fired temperature with gas or wood, that type of pottery, and stoneware, high-temperature fired clay. They are all old friends to him. In response to concern about Naramata Center programs moving from spiritual to personal growth in 1974, Darryl Auten, then a staff member, said, "Human potential movements are not substitutes for developing life commitments, but they may help. We work rather hard at providing programs that allow for personal growth in faith. We don't just do creative arts. We try to inspire people to see the arts as an aha moment, wherein God is discovered." Auten has been learning and sharing clay play since 1968. During that time, he has created conventional household pottery using both kick wheels and newer electric wheels, worked with gas-fired raku, pottery, and typical stoneware pieces. Glazing, firing, and other decorating have been part of his pottery teaching. For 45 years, he has taught pottery in many places and continues to lead workshops and church services with the potter's wheel as the focus of the learning experience. He has collaborated with the artist Catherine Auten for the past 20 years in the creation and sharing of pottery for church and home. Salmon Arm schools have been blessed as he has participated in the school art fair for 10 years plus. The he I am speaking of, the man who plays in the mud and makes raku, is my friend and fellow church family member, Darryl Auten. And I must say, I want to introduce also his Vanna White, Catherine.
Thanks, Jan. We're going to have some fun this evening. Catherine is going to carve two bowls. One, the small one, will become a candle holder that lets the light shine through. Because it's the cracks in our lives that let the light in or the light out. So always be aware of where you're cracked. Cracked pots are okay. Second thing, there are bags of clay scattered around, and we would like you to feel free, especially if you have black clothes on, to open a bag and take a piece out. There's one under your chair, Claire, and there's one there by Lucy. Take a piece of clay. It's white clay, and if you get it on your clothes, it washes out quite beautifully. It won't be a problem. But what we want you to do is feel what it's like to have the clay in hand. I'll pass it back to other rows. There should be 40 pieces here. We want you to get the sense of what the tactile experience is. It's one thing to watch stuff at a distance, but it's quite different to dig into it and feel it. Did anybody not get a piece?
Yeah.
Great, okay.
There's one there.
So just do what you will with it. The more you play with it, the drier it will get, and the quicker it will crack and break. And you can feel it in your skin. Your skin literally dries out from playing with the clay. My plan tonight is to work at linking this play with clay with those occasional aha moments of something beyond ourselves. And some people call that other God. Some people call it the divine, or the eternal, or the spirit. I don't want to put a narrow limit on what that means. It has shifted dramatically for me over the years, and I don't find it that easy now to talk about a God entity, because that seems to want to constrict what is eternal. And so I prefer to look at divine moments or spiritual moments or something that intimates itself in my consciousness. And sometimes it's in the very process of throwing the clay, right at the beginning. Sometimes when I slam clay down to wedge it, it's really awesome. I take a lot of energy. Sometimes it comes at the end of a firing cycle, and we've let this kiln cool down ever since we arrived here, and we're going to open it at the end of the evening, so you have a chance to see what the kiln opening is like. Sometimes it's in that moment when you decide you need to take a hammer to it, because not everything is perfect, and not everything you really want to share. I've got some pieces that should have been hammered a long time ago, but you know what I'm saying. Those intimate moments with what's beyond us, the divine, the eternal, the spirit, out there in here, come when we least expect it. But they do come, and it's those aha moments that we're looking for. So in order, but sometimes disconnected, at the bottom of that worksheet in your hands, there are phrases like wedging, opening, centering, raising, finishing, trimming, drying, bisque firing, glazing, carving, glaze firing, unloading the kiln. They're all part of the process. But I'm going to wedge some clay so that I can begin with it. This clay has been wedged at home already half an hour ago, or an hour ago, so it's ready to go onto the wheel. But the idea is that clay is very much like human beings. If you let it sit too long, it sinks to the bottom. And it becomes very hard. And not easy to throw. So, first of all, I've wedged the clay.
That means what?
Wedging is this process of rolling it. You're wedging the clay now. And sometimes when I'm mixing old clay to get it ready for use, I cut it on a wire and throw it down on a surface like that, on a cloth. And it mixes it, and you constantly turn it. When you're wedging by hand, you're rotating the clay. And I wedge all of mine because it's too hard to throw on the wheel without doing the wedging. The first step that I do, and each potter will do it differently, but when I put the clay on the wheel, I try to make sure that it's stuck down all the way around. Otherwise, I have found that water gets under the edge of the lump and you wear it. It will fly off, and so what I want to do is get this irregular lump of clay. Can you see it over the...
No. Oh, that's good.
My process of centering is to press down from the top and pull in from the side. And the clay gets dry in my hands very quickly.
So your hands,
Sorry?
so your hands get dry.
Yes. Well, the clay gets dry, I guess. What I want to do... Thanks, Steve. Just a minute.
I'll get a piece of glass.
Thank you. Now, I'll just kind of this way. Is that better?
For you?
So what I'm doing is pushing down and pulling in at the same time. Is that how you do it, Stephen?
Yep.
Or do you push?
There's subtle differences.
Yep.
Oh, Steve.
There's no right way to do this, I don't think. The Japanese, the wheel goes the other way around.
Yes. This wheel will go both ways.
I've never tried it the other way around.
I can't. But we've had left-handed potters in our classes who will have the wheel turning the other way. What you want the wheel to do is run away from your fingers. If you run it this way, your fingers dig in.
Mm-hmm.
So if it runs the other way, then you can. And you know, you can do this blindfolded because you can see it, you can feel it. You don't need to see the clay being centered. But you know when it's centered, and if it's not centered, guess what's going to happen? One side is thick, one side is thin. And then you'll get a thin spot at the bottom, and it all comes apart. So, with the clay centered, what I do is open the inside of the bowl, or the bowl to be. And I use my right thumb and press down with my left hand until I get about a quarter of an inch. How much is that in centimeters?
Wait, just
About
quarter of an inch? Quarter of an inch?
One.
Centimeter?
And when that first opening is created, I begin to squeeze between the fingers of my left hand and the the palm of my right hand. And what I want to do is bring this lump of clay out to the side so that there's a clear definition between the inside and the outside. You see it change shape? And the clay is very malleable, especially if you have wedged it properly. It will move under your hands without creating a problem or lumping up. Now I have an air bubble in the bottom, and it's just a small one, but maybe it'll work out as I lift it.
You have a needle?
I'll bring it up a little further. But yeah, that's what I do. I use a needle. Now, see what I'm doing is raising the sides. And see how it starts to pull when I put pressure on and my hand dries the water out of the clay or runs it all off. You know, there's a metaphor in this. The first part of the metaphor is it has to be centered. And heaven help the potter that isn't centered when going to work at the wheel. Many times I've started making pottery and given up and gone and done something else because I couldn't focus or wasn't focused, and the clay wouldn't work with me or for me. So the next part is raising the clay, which is what I'm doing now. And I find it's very important when raising the clay at this stage to keep it as much vertical as possible. If you start bringing it out too soon, the clay will get wet and fall over. Now, I once did a photo shoot with a photographer from the Edmonton Journal, and he came into the garage in Edmonton, and I made this lovely bowl that looks like this, only it came out about like that. And he took pictures, and away they went with them. And he went out and slammed the door. And there was a thin spot right here. And this bowl went like this and formed a perfect scallop all the way around. And I left it on the wheel for 2 days so that I could pick it off, turn it over onto the dried rim, and then I cleaned what was the outside off and made it the inside of the bowl. It was lovely. It's the only bowl I didn't give away. Or could I have that needle for a minute? Yeah, I see I've got 10.
How can you tell that you need more water?
Well, my fingers start to stick to the clay.
Oh, I see.
As soon as it feels sticky, it's time to move, to put more water on. And some of these air bubbles are just a nuisance, but if you don't take them out, then they create problems. Do you need it again? No. Okay. So, I want to make these sides. This is called raising, and then we start to work at finishing. And here's where I want to make the sides of the bowl fairly even. Because they not only you get as much out of it as you can, but you also want to make it thin and even and consistent. And the people that know thin bowls the best are in this room with me tonight. They tell me constantly, that's too heavy. And they're right. Okay, now I'm satisfied that I made the point about raising the sides. And it's at this point that you can start to finish and make the bowl what you want it to be. And if you want a nicer shape to it, you can bring the bottom out more so that there's a nicer shape to the sides of the bowl. How does that look? Pretty good. And then you must dry it off at this point. Otherwise, any pools of water will soften the clay where the water is left. And we'll do a couple more things here. We've worked with potters who urged us to take these special tools. This is like an elephant ear, but it's a wooden rib made out of exotic wood, and they say press the bottom down so that you get a good solid bottom in the bowl. And then clean it up. When Jeremiah watched the potter, and the potter decided that the clay didn't work for one pot or one vessel, he put the clay back into his clay bucket or however he kept it, and then drew it out and made it into another piece of pottery. And when the clay is wet, you can do this again and again if you're not happy with it. If the clay gets dry and firm, like it is in some of your hands now, what we can do is cut it up into smaller pieces and put water on it, soak it up, and it can be reconstituted. And I have an old coffee mill at home, and I take dry clay and put it into the coffee mill and buzz it, and it makes a fine clay powder. And I sprinkle it on my wedging table and just roll the really sloppy stuff into it, because I don't have a pug mill for reconstituting the clay. And you can do it over and over again. The only time you can't reuse the clay is when you've fired it to bisque temperature. And the only possibility of using it at that point is to break it up into very fine pieces. And then you can wedge it into wet clay and use it as a grog. And a grog soaks up, because it's pre-fired, it soaks up the water in part. But the other part is it doesn't shrink as much. So the clay is much more durable if you want to make a big bowl or something like that. The next thing I do before setting a bowl aside is to undercut the bottom. And it's just a way of cleaning up. And I run a piece of fish line under it so it separates. And I'll leave it on this wooden board called a bat, and I can lift it off and go on to another piece. Quick and simple.
Oh, sure. We'll all get started right now.
Okay, I got it. Now, I'm going to make a smaller one, and I won't talk as much, but just go through the process very quickly.
Did that other piece survive?
Pardon?
Did that other piece survive in your time?
It did, it's just really dry, so I'll go back to it at the end.
That's pretty bad.
No, when it's,
It'll be broken in my hands.
I'll go back to it at the end. I figured I'd get one finished and then we'll go back.
So how long has that sat before you were able to carve?
About
Monday. I made these Monday morning, but they've been in a plastic bag from Tuesday evening. Yeah. It would take 12 hours for this to become firm enough for me to turn over so that the bottom can dry. That's in my shop, which is at about 10 or 12 degrees. In a warmer space, it happens much quicker. Okay. Something nice about this, eh?
Well, this is, for me, this is a real treat, watch someone else do the work. I want more talk about spirituality, less about pottery.
We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so here we go again. The clay is on the wheel, it's sealed down, and what I'll do is center it. I didn't re-wedge it on the board, but because I did this just recently, it's quite flexible. And you can feel that when you put it into your hands. This is a smaller lump of clay. That first one was 2,400 grams, which is just over 4 pounds, 4.5 pounds of clay. This is 1,500, which is just under 3 pounds. But it gives an opportunity to try something different. There, it's centered. Get it wet again. And this time, I'm going to take it down, and I establish where I think the bottom should be. And when I'm doing it at home, I take a needle and stick it down through. And there's how thick the bottom is. So it's about 1/4 of an inch. And you don't have to worry about the hole because it self-heals when you put some pressure on it.
Sort of like us?
Yes.
Yeah, trying to make
Yeah, and even crackpots can be used very well. So, I've centered it, I'm opening, and I'm going to bring this lump of clay to the side. And I find that sometimes my thumb doesn't track as well, so I will get a thick bottom in the middle or a thin bottom. Most of us would prefer a thin bottom, so.
This is the spiritual part.
Yeah. You've got to admit it took a long time.
We finally got there.
And then you bring the sides up. The other thing I'd make the point of, you don't do things quickly. That is, if you're moving clay on the wheel, or if you're working with it as a hand-built item, it's really wise to go at it a little bit at a time. Because if you don't, irregular jerking of the clay will pull it out of center and stretch it in places you don't want it stretched. Now the raising is just about complete. This clay is about that thick all the way up. And there's a piece at the bottom that is thicker that I always go back under after and pull it out. And then this is the opportunity to choose final shapes, to round edges, and to make this the way I'd like to have it. So I'm going to come out to the side. And again, whoops, see what I did?
Did you do it again?
You gotta keep your eye on the wheel. But you see what happened? I dropped my hand into it. And you can bring the clay back up and straighten it out. And then
So there's hope for us if we've fallen to the side.
Well,
What a great metaphor.
Here's the other good news, that even eccentrics can succeed. Okay, just a little more. And then sometimes when you distort the top, you can clean it up by taking a needle and putting your finger on the inside and very carefully pressing through, and the whole thing will come off. Yeah, and then again, you go back and round it.
Why do you want it round instead of...
A glaze holds much better on a rounded surface. And the thing we want to avoid are sharp edges, partly because of the risk of cutting, but the glaze doesn't hold well on a sharp edge. So just by rolling it, rounding it off and rolling it over, I think it's more aesthetic anyway. And each potter will do it somewhat differently, but the idea is to make your pieces look really nice.
He's eating his clay.
Who is?
Steven.
I always do.
Oh, he's wetting his
My
finger.
wife says there's clay all over here, Bob.
Do you do
Well,
that? Michelle?
well, it's the heaviest source of liquid. And right now, you gave us clay, but you didn't give us little
That's
drops of
true.
water.
I never thought of it.
That's quite all right. In fact, I don't think we were supposed to be playing this long with it.
Okay. So, one more thing. I'll round the edges here. And one of the things that Catherine and I both do with pots is when they're dry, like the ones on the table behind you there, the really white ones are not fired. So those are pieces that have dried at room temperature, and they're ready to go in the kiln. But before we put them in the kiln, we use those green scouring pads and just go over all the surface and take off any excess pieces, soften the edges, and make sure that there's nothing sharp, because when you go to put it in the kiln, it's easier to clean at that stage than after. And just cut this off and set it aside.
In biblical times when they were doing pottery, the clay must have been, but there were certain places where good clay was and other places with, the poor,
Yes.
yeah.
And it's still the same today. I was with a tour group that went to Cuernavaca in Mexico a number of years ago, and we went to a traditional potter's house, and he had the pottery there because there was a bed of natural clay nearby, and he used that natural clay to make his pots, and he also used a lot of the local chemicals for his glazes, and so his glazes were had a particular style about them, and people all over the area knew the pottery by the glaze and by the style of the pottery.
We had the ground at Maramata.
Yeah,
We used the clay bank at Maramata for glaze.
for glaze, yeah.
How we call it Maramata ground.
There's silt banks all through from the old lake bed that was 100 or so feet higher than it is now. And those silt banks, when mixed with a flux to reduce the firing temperature, produces the most gorgeous dark brown. And if you mix a little tin oxide with it, it will come out a rust color. And there's a piece in the kiln with that glaze on it. So we'll show you once it's cool.
Yeah, when we were just down in Hotoko, we went on a tour, and there was an area that had the clay
Yeah.
for potting. It was quite interesting.
Those of you that were here when Christmas Island was created, when they were excavating to haul the material down to make Christmas Island, there was a streak of blue clay that came out of there, and I got some of it. It wouldn't stick together for throwing on a wheel, but we could have put ball clay with it to have made it work. Okay, trimming. I've got a few more minutes.
Do people know what clay is?
I don't think so.
You could ask them, see what answers you get. Since we're spending so much time with clay.
I think it's a plastic element made out of ground up old stone.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
Actually, I don't want to sound like I'm teaching, but it's a fact that if you take the average Earth, if you take the analysis of the Earth, in other words, it's 40% alumina, and there's a lot of alumina and silica, and of course there's other elements, gold, silver, lead, tin, all of those other things. Clay actually is the same analysis, which shouldn't be too surprising, because clay is actually ground up earth. It takes millions of years. The rocks on the earth, the organic materials are gone. So you're dealing with something that's literally millions of years old.
Yes.
And when you say you can go down the street and dig it up, realize that was the bottom of the ocean at one time.
Yes.
Millions of years ago.
Millions.
And we're here for a blink of an eye.
Yes. Yeah.
So where does the white clay come from?
The clay we're using comes from Laguna in California, the company. But for years we used plainsman clay from Medicine Hat, and it's mined in East End, Saskatchewan, which is near Cypress Hills Park. They truck it over, and they have an analysis that produces the standard clay consistently.
White clay means there's no iron in it. There's a lot of iron around it for most clays, but China clay originally came from China, and there are other places around the world where you have pure clay. I say pure clay without the iron. Around here, it makes bricks. There used to be a brick factory in Armstrong, and there used to be a brick factory in Enderby. In the 1970s, the remains were still there, and they actually salvaged oxides from the bins that were there.
Yeah, neat. Yeah, there's clay everywhere, but some of it is more suited. We have boxes of brown clay at home, but I didn't bring it because I know what it does to your hands and your clothes. This bowl was made yesterday morning. I turned it over last night, and at 6 o'clock this morning, I covered it up so that it wouldn't dry too much. But what you want to do is take a piece that is rough shaped and make it look like a finished bowl, like Catherine was carving here. And so what I do is I center it on the wheel. I use a pencil to draw a line on the wooden bat, and then I hold it in place with a lid and start to scour away the clay.